So let's now check in with legal analyst Tre Lovell as he's here with us on Live Now from Fox to break down some of this breaking news coming out of Los Angeles County. Tre, thanks so much for hopping on to talk about this. But let's just start with the very basics. That new number, 50 years to life. How did the judge come up with this, and what do we expect to now go going forward?
You know, I'm not surprised because it did seem fairly clear that they were entitled to some resentencing based on all the work and conduct they've done post-conviction. The different prison workers that they came to their side, the family was on their side, and just the list of things that they have done and accomplished. It did seem that they were entitled to something. However, nobody wants to be the one that lets them free. So rather than, agreeing to go with what the defense wanted, manslaughter, which means they would have got out immediately for time served, the judge says, hey, I'm going to kick the can down the road. I'm going to resentence them to where they can get parole and then go before a parole board. We're going to let the parole board decide. So I think the judge wanted to be safe. Didn't really want to be the one to says, hey, you're free, but give them a path, for somebody else to decide. And if the parole board does decide, then that should be the right decision.
It has been interesting. I'm glad you said kicking the can down the road, because we've been watching all of the steps that this case has taken over the last few years as the Menendez brothers have really tried to get their case either some form of clemency or just released on time served as well. We do know that, though, still, this ultimately ends up in the hands of the governor, Gavin Newsom. Can you explain that role that he has in this and how things look for the brothers going forward as they approach the parole board as well?
Yeah, sure. So we need to remember there were three paths that the boys were pursuing to get out. The first was a writ of habeas corpus, which just really means since new evidence came out since the trial, they should be entitled to either a retrial or a reverse decision. The second was the resentencing, which just happened. And the third is the clemency decision before Governor Newsom. So what he had done is he had wanted a criminal risk assessment done to determine whether or not the boys pose a risk. He wanted that done by June 13th, and then he would decide whether or not he would grant him clemency, a pardon, or what have you. And so now that it's going before the parole board, I would assume Newsom's going to let them do that. Once again, I think even Newsom didn't necessarily want to be the one to let him free, but they're kind of pushing this, towards the parole board. So my guess is Newsom's just going to let it play out with the parole board. He's going to let them decide. And that'll be it.
And so also another key piece of this, and we just heard from the brothers' attorney, Mark Garagos. He said that the brothers have been caught up in the politics of it all ever since this case happened. Of course, they said they were in the middle of a DA race back in the 90s when they were officially and initially, again, indicted on those charges and then found guilty. But now we also saw as they were making that bid late last year, it was another DA race. Ultimately, Nathan Hochman came out on top, and he is the official district attorney there in Los Angeles. Can we sort of talk about his position on things as it was going into this resentencing hearing, and then now where he stands, if we are going to find out where he stands now that the sentence has officially been changed?
Sure. So the previous DA, George Gascon, was very much pro-rehabilitation, pro-resentencing. He had resentenced, I think, over 300 convictions when he was DA. So his policy was more, less people in prison, more leniency, more rehabilitation. That was his attitude. Hochman, when he got elected, is completely different. He's much tougher on crime. He's much tougher on prisoners, remaining in prison. And so he took a different attitude here. He took a look at it, and then he even tried to pull it off the docket and take back the request for resentencing. But the judge said it was too late and he couldn't do it. And so Hochman's position has been, hey, they have not admitted the truth of the crimes and why they did it. They're still, harboring these lies that they told, where they said they killed their parents because of sexual abuse and the fear they were going to get killed. He said that's not the truth. They need to come to grips with what happened, tell the truth, come out with it, and then they can be on the road to rehabilitation and be on the road to resentencing. So his position was until they do that, they should not be resentenced.
And so we've also heard from others, including the brothers' attorney, Mark Garrigo, saying that it's about time that this happened. But let's talk a little bit more about that California youthful offenders law. How does that work? From what I understand, it's if you're under the age of 26, you are eligible for some sort of resentencing. Can you walk us through that?
Yeah, so if any type of murder happens after that law came into effect, it basically says, if no matter what the crime, if you're under 26, you will be entitled to parole, a possibility of getting parole. Whereas many times, if you're older than that, people get sentenced to life in prison without parole, and that's it. And it goes partly to the fact of the age. California has changed a little bit in its policy in terms of how we, deem rehabilitation. And when somebody's young enough to commit a heinous crime, that maybe they should be given a second chance, and they're too young to have their entire life ruined. And so this law came into effect and says, hey, if you're below a certain age, we are going to give you an opportunity for parole no matter what. And so by resentencing them now, it triggered this law to where they would be required to have a right to a parole hearing and to get out that way. So California has changed a little bit. This is part of California's public policy to really give second chances.
And so we also, again, heard from the family. They were in court today testifying on behalf of the Menendez brothers, talking about the fact that they feel the brothers have changed immensely while incarcerated, saying they've taken accountability for their actions and that the family unequivocally forgives them at this point. Does that really matter in a case like this, the judge hearing some of those remarks from those who really support the brothers?
I think it does, because other than the parents, the families are victims. In most cases, when family members get murdered, the other family members, they want their piece of blood. They want the person who did it to remain in prison to get the worst sentence. And so it's very unusual that victims of those that have been murdered, family members, will come out and support the convicted. And so the fact that I think all but one a while ago had all the family members except for one had supported the release, and they were very impassioned today. Very passionate about having the release. And so when you have all of the victims wanting the boys released, and you have 35 years served, and you've got a very strong post-conviction record in terms of your conduct, in terms of what you've done, in terms of what you may suggest to society, that you can be a benefit to society, you can actually help. And there's a very low recidivism, which means a very low chance that you could recommit or do another act. When all that's cumulative and combined together, it's a compelling package. And I think, that's what did it for the judge, but certainly the testimony from the family was very significant.
We also know from some of our Fox News reporters as well that inside of that resentencing, the brothers did appear on camera via video from that San Diego prison. They had big smiles on their faces. One of their defense attorneys told them congratulations as well. Of course, we know, again, we've been talking about it, the path and their fight isn't done yet. But truly, what are the odds looking like for the brothers to be released as soon as this year, 2025? Could this be their year ultimately?
I think it could. I mean, we're early enough into the year where they'll probably get a pretty quick, parole hearing. They've got that critical risk assessment, which did rank their assessment moderate, which is a little higher than what they anticipated. But those assessments are routine by the parole board. But that's going to go into it, as well as what has happened thus far. The parole board is going to consider, also, the same facts that got the judge to resentence them. And so, when you're looking at the facts here, it's a very compelling argument why they should be, released, by the parole board and given a second chance.
All right. Again, we have legal analyst Tre Lovell here with us, still breaking down this case. Anything else that we need to be focused on in the next few days and months as we're looking ahead to seeing ultimately what the Menendez brothers' fate will be?
I just think, if they are released, it's going to be interesting how they, adapt into society. It's been 35 years since they went away. Largely right when cell phones were coming out, computers were just getting developed. I don't even know if the internet was up and running at the time. So, they've been incarcerated for a long time, and it's not easy to adjust. And so that's going to be very interesting how they come out and adjust. But, I anticipate, that the parole board will probably grant them parole. And then, I think the media will just follow them, months and years down the road.
And it has been interesting. Speaking of the media, this is where we had that press conference just a few moments ago, wrapping up with the Menendez brothers, their lawyers speaking, their supporters, friends, and family, all on this resentencing that is now official. Brothers now sentenced to 50 years to life in prison, now making them eligible for parole. We do appreciate legal analyst Tre Lovell for being with us here on Live Now from Fox as we broke down those breaking details as it came into our newsroom.